Hello, everybody. Welcome to Deerfield, remotely, though it may be. It's a pleasure to have you with us this evening. What we're going to do is take a look at what Historic Deerfield has collected over the last few months. COVID has maybe slowed us down a little bit, but not too much. And within that, I want to focus too on the Deerfield Collectors Guild and what we've acquired from that important support. You know, each of us in our lives over the last 5 months have changed what we do and how we do it. And even as life goes on, you know, we each from time immemorial have left a trail of artifacts behind each of us. 200 years from now, people are going to find masks and old trunks and so on, and maybe wonder what they are, or maybe a whole different gathering of impressions and ideas will surround them. They may become mythical, and we'll be long gone and can't defend ourselves. But that's the point of this too, because the meanings of objects change over time, and it's important for us to be aware of that, but also value that as cultural change. So let's get rolling. The point of collecting at a historic Deerfield is largely about documentation, but the end goal is enjoyment and understanding the context in which we live. So I want to start off with a real bang, and you'll see why in just a second. We had, or actually I had, the dream phone call for a museum guy not quite a year ago. A friend of mine called, an attorney, and he said that he had a donor with a magnificent collection of mostly American redware, but other things too, that needed a home with no strings attached. The only, except for one, and that is complete anonymity would have to be maintained. So in December and a little bit into January, we picked up from this person's house 495 objects, all told. And you get some sense of the quality of the redware here, largely New England, but great representative examples from elsewhere up and down the eastern seaboard that fits perfectly in the extant historic Deerfield collection of American redware and dramatically improves it. So when this material is all cataloged and installed, if you have any interest in redware, you now have to come to Deerfield. Also in this collection is amazing tollware, which also greatly strengthens what we have, and also some furniture. As I said, it comes with no strings attached. In fact, the donor realized that they live in an empty house now, so she started collecting again, and every once in a while calls for advice. So it's the dream situation. When Amanda Lang and I, our curatorial department director, went to pay an initial call, these two samplers were hanging in a bedroom, and they are just fabulous. In and of themselves, I whispered to Amanda that they alone were worth the trip. What you have here, if it's not your eyesight, these are virtually identical because they were executed by two twins. Mary Jane Monroe and Clarissa Ann Monroe, who were both 11 years old in June of 1835. So we have twin samplers by twin girls, and some from Hillsborough, New Hampshire. And I just hope out there someplace is a pair of portraits of these girls as well. Moving on from that tremendous gift, We've acquired other things as well. Went to the Delaware Antique Show, which we love to do every November. And there in the right or left rear corner of the room, some of you may remember this embroidered blanket hanging on the wall. As I approached it, I thought, oh, that's great. That's has to be from Western Mass, because this is the kind of object associated with this part of the American landscape. But when I got up to it, as you can see, it says 1831 Lucretia Bush Busty. Well, the long and the short of it is that Busty, New York is out west in Chautauqua County. Got a map here. If John Hurtig is listening, he'll know exactly where this is. But so I was curious, well, what's the link? Well, we did some quick genealogical research via the phone on site. That's the kind of quick draw research that you can do now. And sure enough, Lucretia Bush, born in 1759, was from Connecticut, and she married in Westfield, Mass, Moses Bush in 1777. So she learned about this genre before they moved to Western New York State. Just a terrific, very visual thing. And very rarely documented in this depth. We were interested in it because of its beauty, but also because it illustrates how cultural design ideas travel. Shifting gears again and shifting centuries, we acquired this a little bit before the embroidered blanket from the London costume dealer Meg Andrews. It's, to use the period term, it's a hood. We might be more used to thinking of women in olden times wearing caps indoors, but they also wore hoods. You see here on the right a transcription of a probate inventory, the widow graves in Hadley, Massachusetts, just down the road from Deerfield in 1666. At the bottom of the entry, it says 1 holland apron, 2 white aprons, a scarf, and a hood. Well, here is a hood dated 1684. That's a very important addition to our clothing collection. In fact, as many of you know, the textile, clothing, and embroidery collections at Historic Deerfield could be a standalone institution themselves. Here's another look at it opened, where it takes on the form of a visor. And next to it is a portrait, fairly famous portrait, of Mrs. Elizabeth Freak and baby Mary, owned by the Worcester Art Museum, also late 17th century. And she has a related kind of headgear on that you wouldn't describe as a cap, and I think you might be more apt to describe as a hood. Now, Skinner's auctions just a couple of weeks ago had a sale, and a pretty good one. And in it was this Hadley chest. And anybody, including myself, said the last thing Historic Deerfield needs is another Hadley chest. In fact, I went to preview the sale to look at something else for someone. And I thought, well, while I'm here, since I did my master's thesis on these things 40 years ago, and there are 250 of them altogether. So this was one I never saw. So I thought, well, I'm here, I may as well make some notes. Lo and behold, it's really a fabulous example that now will allow us to deaccession a couple of things and upgrade the collection in this important area of Western Massachusetts, join furniture. The MH may stand for a young woman named Miriam Hovey, who was married in 1709 and passed away in 1713. So her timing is about right. So there is something of an identifiable history with this, but Most importantly, all of its working parts survive, including its painted surface underneath a later coat of degraded varnish in this case. So we have that. We also have the fact that it is the much rarer two-drawer format rather than a single drawer, which means that the sides have 4 panels. You get more of an impression of the paint on, surviving paint on this object. I would place this Hadley chest in the top 10 or 12 extant examples. And it has the kind of constructional details that you see on these things. I hope I'm not going into too much detail, but I'm assuming that if you're listening in, you like this sort of thing. So if you don't, bear with us. Hadley chests always have a fully framed back, but the lower cavity where the drawers are is usually covered just with a nailed board that always looks out of place and even like a repair, but it's not. And then you see on the left the typical drawer construction with a single dovetail and side hung construction because of the weight of the contents. A little bit like how a file cabinet is supported its drawers on the sides rather than up from underneath. Whoops. And then let's open it up before we move along here. The interior, I want to show you 2 things. One is the fact, see all these polka dot-like details, and you might wonder, so I'm going to tell you what those are. Those are the marks or scars left behind from the nests of mud daubers, who are wasps. So this thing is old enough to have been a kind of a hive. And you often see this kind of scarring in ancient furniture. So proves the point that these things left the parlor and moved around the house and the farm and maybe wound up out in the barn. The other thing is the lid. Now, it appears to be original. The cleats are right, so on and so forth, but it's had a lot of damage here. And I think what happened is that maybe about 3 weeks after this was delivered, somebody locked themselves out. And then they pried the thing open, they broke it, they cracked it, and someone came along with a little riven oak board, a cleat, to stabilize these cracks. And I just love that kind of thing. I think because it shows living in action with these objects. So let's change centuries again. Bill and Trish Alley, longtime supporters of historic Deerfield and great collectors, mostly of Vermont things, but occasionally other things. They made the gift of this terrific small 4-drawer chest. It's Connecticut, cherry, poplar, survives with what appears to be its original finish and original hardware. Dates about 1780 during the Revolution. And I think that one thing that illustrates that it might have been made in the era of the Revolution is the small size of these brasses that seem to be not professionally cut or actually sawn. They're very thin, and it makes me think of the metal shortages that happen in warfare and certainly happened during the American Revolution. Then there on the left, you see this very distinctive foot. And I'm not quite sure where it was made in Connecticut, but I am guessing based on a couple other objects we know of that it comes from Glastonbury, just east and a little bit south of Hartford. Also distinctive, if you ever encounter one of these in the field, are these huge dovetails that attach the bottom of the case to the sides. So let's go on. Same century, but we're going to head towards Boston. We, a little over a year ago, we purchased this clock with the museum's collections fund. The museum collections fund at Historic Deerfield is fully funded by monies gleaned from deaccessioning objects. And so we take things that aren't so good or maybe duplicates, or we've acquired a better one, that sort of thing, and turn them into ever more salient objects. Peter Sawyer had this clock made by Nathaniel Mulliken in Lexington sometime before he died in 1767. So I would date this maybe at the beginning of the 1760s. Two things. First of all, we have a great clock collection in Deerfield. It's by no means comprehensive, but it's great, except that it has lacked basically a Baroque style, urban looking brass dial tall case clock from Boston. Now this isn't from Boston, it's from Lexington, just a few miles west. But Mulliken was known for his metalworking, which, forget Boston, is almost of London quality. And yet he wasn't from London. A little bit like the Willard family, the Mullikens were 3 or maybe even 4 generations of clockmakers west and north of Boston in Essex County. So this clock, the other thing about the clock is that it survives in absolutely untouched condition. It's as if this thing was wrapped up and never even moved from where it was owned. The only thing that it's missing is a provenance. We don't know anything about its history, and that appears to be lost. But so this clock answers a couple needs in our ability to interpret timekeeping and fashion, given the fact that these clocks were real status symbols in 18th century America. So just a terrific thing. As you know, I love clocks. Here is the movement. There at the left, runs for 8 days. Now, a third thing about Monroe's clock and making in Lexington is that it's relatively easy to date Mulliken clocks that say Lexington. He died in 1767. His son by the same name took over the shop, and that lasted until April 19th, 1775, when, as Amos Doolittle shows us here, the clock shop was among the buildings destroyed on Lexington Green. So this clock says a little bit about political and military history too, although the clock survives, where it was made doesn't. Now, also at sort of the other end of the scale, this clock turned up in a group antique shop in northern New Jersey. And we acquired it for almost nothing, even though it is substantially intact. I want to talk about that black dial in just a minute, but the case itself is just tremendous. The movement's right, seat board's right. It's an early refinish, and that looks pretty good too. We love the clock, or at least the case, because it's labeled by Felitas Bliss, who was one of the leading cabinet makers in Springfield, Mass, and who probably made this clock around 1795. He worked with his brothers Festus and Paul. I only bring up that because the name Festus has always intrigued me. I always think of Gunsmoke and that kind of thing, but not Western Dodge City, but Western Springfield, Mass. A couple of things about the clock. Number one is the woodwork itself, and I show you a detail of one of the finials. Now, this is really quite a piece of workmanship in its own right, because it was turned and then carved to simulate a brass finial. And it shows the level of workmanship in this place. And then if I could, I'll show you a detail of the dial of the clock, I hope, which is right there. And it's nothing like a clock dial or an enamel clock dial that you've ever seen on a late 18th century tall clay clock. You'd expect it to be basically white, almost looked like a piece of porcelain, even though it's essentially painted. So what has happened? And this, of course, creates a quandary. So what I'm trying to do now is to share some of our thought processes. You might say, if you were a real purist, that this is a problem. But it's a problem exacerbated by the fact that this is the original dial, and was made in the Osborne factory in England and shipped, as thousands of them were, to America. And then someone came along in the late 19th century and decided they'd go with a whole different look. So what to do about that? Actually, I think this is an embarrassment of riches, because it gives us the chance to interpret two aesthetics. And as I said at the top of the show, we like the idea of objects moving through time and being documents of the times that they experienced through all the generations up to now. So what our goal is here is the dial, the original dial with its later paint, has to survive. I don't think we would ever consider removing this paint in an effort to get back to the original surface. Osborne dials are not rare, so sooner or later we'll find one with the standardized fit that we can mount on this clock movement and show it that way, or advance the time machine and show it at the end of the 19th century. So just a little diversion there. I want to share something else too, and basically interrupt myself. This is kind of late breaking news, but it shows how it happens at historic Deerfield. And we love the hunt, and we like to go far afield with it, but sometimes the hunt comes to us. So I want to show you something else, which is over here. And so just a few days ago, this envelope came from someone we don't know who lives in South Deerfield. The nice note said, my brother passed away, I cleaned out the house, and I found these things, do you want them? So, never say no. So there's that. And inside, well, here's some make-believe reproduction currency from the American Revolution. This is a patent award that is, wait a minute, is upside down here. I'll give you a rough idea of it. United States of America. It's from, I think, the 1880s. Here we are out in Western New York again. A Monroe County bond from 1882 for $1,000. Good luck with that. But in this envelope, out of the blue, we were stunned to find a single first half of the 17th century kid glove. And we are scrambling around to try to figure out how this woman's brother might have encountered and found and kept this amazing survival. So this is a very nice addition to our clothing and accessory collection. We have a couple other gloves, but not one quite like this, so all to the good. So let's renew our excursion here. And we found this at auction in California. And it's a miniature, it's a tiny little thing, done by a very well-known and excellent miniaturist, Benjamin Trott, who is from Boston, worked up and down the eastern seaboard and in Ohio. He worked as far south as Charleston, South Carolina. We were interested in this because we didn't have an example of his work, but the sitter is William Lyman, who was from Northampton, Massachusetts, just 16 miles down the road. He was a player during Shays' Rebellion. He served in the Massachusetts legislature. He was in Congress. He was the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Brigadier General of Militia, and then later on U.S. Consul in London. So it's a very nice addition to our miniature collection. This was about 6 months ago. Since then, not long after COVID grabbed us by the wrist, these things turned up at Morphy's auctions down in Pennsylvania. And the shoe buckles and this fragment of hairteen or maureen wool textile used as, in this case, as part of a bed hangings were owned by Major General Artemus Ward of Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. He was the one of 4 major generals that the Continental Congress first appointed, and he ran the Continental Army outside Boston until George Washington took over. So he was more than a local hero. So the shoe buckles are nice. We have lots of others examples like them, but any chance to have a documented textile is important to us too. And so that was our thinking behind this acquisition. Now, just like you might wonder why historic Deerfield needs another Hadley chest, you might wonder, why does historic Deerfield need another Powderhorn, given the world-class collection of American engraved Powderhorns that came to us, partial gift, partial purchase, from Bill Guthman 15 years ago. But I guess this is an exception. This too went through Skinner's. The horn itself is fairly modest. It was owned by Reuben Alexander, who was from Northfield, Massachusetts, right next door here. He served under Captain Selah Barnard of Deerfield, so we like that idea. 1755 is pretty early for these sorts of things, and in fact, this was carved about 2 weeks before the Battle of Lake George on September 8, 1755. What intrigued me the most, and was not cataloged at all, is this bust-length portrait that you see on the right. And I wonder just who that is. Chief Hendrick, who was the Mohawk leader, was killed literally alongside Colonel Ephraim Williams of Western Massachusetts at the beginning of the battle. And he was a major player. It was actually presented to King George III in the 1740s. So he was notorious in his own right. So I wonder about this hatless person on the Powderhorn, and whether it could be an image of Hendrick or perhaps of Ephraim Williams himself. But it's intriguing, and I think we can learn more about it. We're also interested in paper and in engraving. And here we have the death of General Pike. We haven't had in the collection any work by the Eddy family, Isaac Eddy or his son Oliver Tarbell Eddy, who went on to become a portrait painter. They lived in Wethersfield, Vermont, here in the Connecticut Valley, not far from Windsor, about 80 miles north of here. This is quite a piece. It depicts Pike's death at the Battle of York, now called Toronto, in 1813 during the War of 1812. And it's a huge print, number one, but number two, intriguing, it's not really an engraving, it's an etching. And so what that says about printing and so on in the Connecticut Valley in the 18 teens is significant. The library's been active too. I want to share a couple of things here. A collection of psalm books and music books came up. Scott DeWolf had them down in Maine. A couple of them had been sold before we could get to them, but we acquired the rest of them, including these, which are from Northampton, Newburyport, and Boston, and were titles of music books that we did not have. I want to stop at this second and say we have another acquisition in the library, brand new, and that's a new librarian. Jean Selensky just started 2 days ago. She comes to us from the Winterthur Museum, and we're delighted to have her on board. We have acquired a map or two. This is a terrific map of Jamaica, as you can see. It dates to about 1730, was done by Matthew Suter in Augsburg in Bavaria. We're interested in this because of the triangular trade, and it's important to the Atlantic Rim, including New England. New England was a player in this. You know about making rum and all that, but New Englanders also supplied the horses that ran the sugar mills in the Caribbean. And all of that is illustrated in this amazing cartouche that shows the sugar making process there at the lower right. We've also continued to develop another sub-collection, and that is the last 2 or 3 years, abolitionist ceramics. And of course, social justice is on all of our minds now, so this collection becomes more and more poignant as time goes on. I'll show you one piece in particular while I'm talking. This a jug made in Staffordshire in the 1820s or 30s. So really important material that underscores the fact that Deerfield is, and its history is multicultural to the extreme. It's the interpretation of this place has often been biased, but this is a place occupied by Anglo-Europeans who speak different languages, by Africans, by Native Americans, and we need to be able to tell all of these stories. So developing different aspects of the material culture of everyone's story is important to us. This is another intriguing thing. It's not so much about social justice as social consciousness. And you can't really tell what it is in this slide, I apologize. It's a punch bowl, but instead of encouraging alcohol consumption, this one encourages you not to drink. It says, urge no health, you know, as I raise a glass to your health. They don't want that. So I don't know what kind of soft beverage was first served in something like this, but we have a terrific punch bowl collection, and we couldn't pass this up at the New York Ceramics Fair last January. In that same vein, we have recently acquired, same time frame, a Costrel. And this, as you can see, was probably made in Pisa or Montorme, Italy, sometime in the first half of the 17th century. And what this is essentially a ceramic canteen. The rope goes down through those applied slots, and you can wear this on your hip. Now, why would we want Italian ceramics from the 17th century? Well, again, it's all about context. And from these sites, related ceramics have been found. The Hollister House excavation in Glastonbury, Connecticut, the Paul Revere House in Boston, and also archaeology down in Jamestown. Similarly, we have not had a good example of Nottingham ware in the collection, which has been found in archaeological context in New England. Here's a fragment from a dig in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. This also came up at the Ceramics Fair in New York in January, and we were delighted to acquire it because if you look at the terminal, the lower terminal on the handle, it matches one that we found at the Nims House site when it was excavated by the UMass Summer Field School in Archaeology in 1988. So that is a terrific find that helps us to illustrate the kinds of buried wares and other things that people lived with in this great part of the world. So there's an overview of some of the great things that have turned up for historic Deerfield in general. I want to close with three more things that the Deerfield Collectors Guild has acquired, and which goes strong. We've been at this now 6 years. Many of you were involved then in the acquisition of the Stebbins family tall case clock. That's what got us started. New trustee Debbie Dearborn is the chair of the guild at this point. I also want to acknowledge the work of Pierre Perreur on this venture of ours, and Taylor Wagensile, who was also heavily involved at the beginning of all this. So the purpose of the Guild, for those who don't know, is to give us a little peace of mind and a little war chest when things turn up that were made and or owned in Deerfield specifically. So this turned up at a local auction not long ago, a few months ago. And it went, I've forgotten exactly what it went for, but it was, we were prepared to go to a lot more. It was like $280 or something. It's a server in the form of a dressing table or lowboy made during the arts and crafts era by Dr. Edwin Thorne here in Deerfield. We date this between 1904 and 1907. Deerfield is better known in the arts and crafts era for Deerfield blue and white needlework and for metalwork, but furniture was made too. And this is a really terrific example that came down in Edwin Thorne's family. Another thing that has turned up, which is just terrific, is this little painting by the artist James Wells Champney, who was the nephew of White Mountain landscape artist Benjamin Champney. He married a Deerfield girl who you see here at the right, and so they summered here in Deerfield in the big white house next to the Flint Center where the Creelman family lived for a long time and which is now owned by Historic Deerfield. So he did this little portrait. We think of his son Frere fishing maybe on the Deerfield River. And you can see what it says there on the frame: too rainy for school, just enough for fishing. And we also think that the artist was responsible for the frame. So this is a nice little addition to the collection. Of greater magnitude is this. This is basically a hand-crafted atlas done by a young lady named Emily Draper in 1822. And she did this probably when she was at school, not in Deerfield, but in Greenfield. That is possible. I'm going to show you some details inside in just a second. There are 19 maps altogether, as well as space for a few more state maps that she ever completed. This was sold at Sotheby's in January, and we just had to have it. And the Collectors Guild made that possible. She went on 10 years later to work at Deerfield Academy herself as a teacher in the early 1830s. So inside, get a sense of her work. For all the copy books that I've seen and that you've probably seen, this goes down as perhaps the best ever. Here's an overall map of what she was trying to record in 1822. We figured out the source of this. It is a map executed, where are my notes here, by Jacob Cummings and William Hilliard in Boston in 1821, the year before, for their ancient and modern geography. So this is clearly the prototype. I'll back up so you can either agree or disagree, but we think that that's the source a year before. And interleaved are pages that place the following map in context. So here's Massachusetts with Vermont and Connecticut and Rhode Island, New York, and the Atlantic Ocean, by the way. There at the right. And then this is what it looks like. So this little book is full of these watercolor maps and ink. And I just have no idea how long it took her to do this, but we're certainly glad that she did. So you might ask, well, what's next? And I couldn't come to work tonight and share all this with you without having an answer to that. Just tomorrow, Dwayne Merrill up in Williston, Vermont, is selling a lot of stuff, but among them are two pictures, and I hope we can come away with one of them, and that's this. This is a painting, oil on canvas, by Charles Louis Haida, who was born in France but grew up in Pennsylvania and got some training in New York, but spent most of his artistic career in Vermont with a sojourn or two to Western Massachusetts. This is his painting entitled Deerfield Plains. So for those of you who know Greenfield, you're basically on the site, let's say, of that great big stone overpass over routes 5 and 10, and you're looking south. There's the railroad track itself. Beyond that is what's now Deerfield Street. That covered bridge is gone, but now a footpath is at that point. Beyond it, there at the right, this is all on the Green River. In the distance, you also see water. That's the Deerfield River. The big clump of trees above the covered bridge is Pine Hill here in Deerfield. At the left is the Wecumptuck Range, and then in the distance is Mount Sugarloaf. So we are really hoping to be able to bring this back to Deerfield, partly because it was owned by one of America's earliest collectors and antiquarians, a name you've never heard of, but Solon Newton. And this painting, along with another one, was sold in 1984 at a Bill Smith auction. Historic Deerfield couldn't acquire it then, but I hope that can happen tomorrow. So that's our story for this evening. And I guess we can open it up to questions.
Great, thank you so much, Phil. And my apologies to everyone who we were working through some technical difficulties in the beginning, so you missed my introduction, and it was fantastic, or it would have been, but we got straight to the good stuff, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We are happy to take some questions if you type it into the chat box, which you should be able to access by clicking on the chat button below. I do have a question for you, Phil, and it goes back to that glove that you showed in the beginning. What is that made of? What is the material?
It's leather, it's kid, so it's, you know, it's basically goat skin, very finely developed. We think that it's British, but we really haven't researched it enough to know. And although it's a little fragile, it's in fairly good condition. And it sure goes to show that you never know what you're going to find.
Another question here, are there anything particular, either specific or generally, that folks in the audience should keep their eyes out for to help HD in their efforts?
Well, that's a question that we and all museum people get fairly regularly. What are you looking for? And it sounds like I'm being snide or flip when I only say the next thing. But that's the truth. We try, you know, we have weaknesses in the collection or upgrades that we'd like to make, but it really doesn't work that way. We have to be able to identify things as they turn up, because they don't you know, we can't just go out and get one. We have to work on the schedule of fate as it brings objects our way. So we want everybody involved with the Guild and with Historic Deerfield to keep an eye out. Many of you do this. I get emails, and Amanda Lang does, Ned Lazaro. We all hear from people just to make sure that we know about in fact, I had 3 or 4 emails about the Charles Haida picture that we hope to acquire tomorrow. So you're part of the process, and please help us out.
Okay. There's a question, Phil, for registration for this webinar. We did ask folks to tell us a little bit about the challenges or how coronavirus is affecting their collecting and acquisition of objects, and maybe talk a little bit about how it has impacted Historic Deerfield, or if it has.
Yeah, well, I think the roster of things I shared this evening, which is not everything that's come in the last 8 or 9 months, might suggest that it hasn't slowed us down too much. But as though I am the CEO, as most of you know, I used to be long time ago, the chief curator here, and I've been a curator elsewhere too. So I'm part of, you know, once a curator, always a curator. So I'm part of the process and have my eyes out. I think that if there is a difference, it has to do with leaps of faith, which is dangerous in the marketplace. But you've got to trust people, and you've got to find ways to examine things closely, even though that kind of contact is much more difficult than it used to be. So the internet has a lot to do with this, and used in much the same way that we've used it tonight. So to me, that's the issue. The connoisseurship, the research, the cataloging, the interpretation. Of course, the end of the process is having people come to Deerfield to enjoy and learn from these things. And that's certainly been slowed the last 5 months. As you know, we're opening up this weekend. But I guess that stands as my answer, mostly that there's a bridging process that is at the connoisseurship level.
Okay. Question about the overall HD collection. How many objects are in the collection, and what would you describe as the greatest strengths of our collection?
Well, relatively speaking, the Historic Deerfield collection is small-ish at 28,000 objects. What we try to do is remove from the bottom and add to the top to always increase the quality, interest, and significance of the collection, which we view as maybe if you want to try to quantify it, maybe the 6th in the top 6 public collections in the country, understanding that the focus is on Americana. We're a little different, though, in that while we have these nationally important objects, we also focus on the cultural documentation of a place, being this village, this town, this valley, as symbolic of small towns throughout America. So we have a lot of things cooking. I can't really narrow down the strength of the collection. It might be easier to talk about weaknesses, actually. Our glass collection, we have some important glass, but it's not universally outstanding. I might have said until 7 or 8 months ago that American redware was a weakness, but now it's an equal strength. So it's all a process, and in behalf of all of you and the country, we try to be careful, assiduous, but also exciting collectors, and we love to share, so come see us.
All right, well, I think that does it for questions, but of course, I would invite any of you to submit emails to me, Jesse, at Historic Deerfield, or of course, Phil, and I'll forward them to Phil anyways if you send them to me, so you might as well start with him. But we would love feedback too. This is a new thing for us, and we're excited to be able to take you behind the scenes and share parts of our collection and our strengths here at Historic Deerfield, and we look forward to doing more of it. But I invite you to help us figure out what you'd like to see, what works well from these presentations, what hasn't worked, and help us build this together. And we appreciate and welcome any feedback, especially from our Collectors Guild members, which we consider some of our best friends among all of our supporters. So we do have a slate coming up. Forum on September 26th, The Bitter and the Sweet, the Material Culture of Sugar in Early New England, which is fantastic. So I would encourage you to check that out, as well as our Friends Annual Meeting on October 1st. All of you will be receiving some invitations to check that out as well. And we'll review some of these acquisitions and other sort of state of the state here in Deerfield. So certainly more to come for all of that, but you're always invited to check us out on historic-deerfield.org for the complete list of events. So once again, thank you all, and especially thank you to Phil. But thanks for tuning in tonight. We appreciate the support, and welcome any feedback and suggestions you might have on it. But for now, so long and take care.
Thanks everybody.